Hey everybody and welcome back. This is Leap a Lot, and today we're getting back into some Final Fantasy VI. If you didn't catch the last video, the link is up above. This time we're going to adopt an orphan by throwing jerky at him. We're going to become one with our enemies, and we'll go high-speed scuba diving to meet up with our friends again. This one shouldn't be too long for y'all, but it sure did take a long time for me. As we wrapped up the last video, we caught our first glimpse of Gao. Like I said before, Gao will be pretty important in this run just because he can do some unusual things for us. So we need to go get him as quickly as we can. Before we do that though, let me just explain a little about this video and the part of the world that we're in. We're in a section of the world called the Veldt. While you're on the Veldt, the only enemies that you can encounter are those that you've already seen. This can work really well for us, but it can also be pretty terrifying. Right now we've only played through some of the lower leveled areas of the game, so nothing is too dangerous. Eventually though, there will be encounters here that are super deadly. Gotta save a lot in this kind of run. Especially since some of the fights we'll run into on the Veldt are mini-bosses. That means that there will be quite a few fights out here that we can't run from. When you win a fight on the Veldt, you do not gain any experience. You still get any money the battle would normally grant, as well as any items the enemies would normally drop. Later in the game, we'll also be able to use these fights to gain magic AP, which will let us learn some spells. This will be vital in this run, so we'll be back in the Veldt pretty frequently. The other unique thing about the Veldt has to do with Gao. For us to actually hunt down Gao is a pain though. We have to first get to this only city, Moblas, on the continent to make a purchase. We need some dried meat. That's right, we can only attract this wild teenager raised by wolves with the power of Slim Jim. After we have our jerky in hand, we have to get through a couple battles. We can only find Gao in some specific circumstances. You can't get him if you're in a pincer attack, where you're surrounded by enemies. I don't believe that you can get him after winning a back attack, but I could be wrong about that one. I just haven't encountered it. Either way, we'll need to struggle through a couple encounters to find him, then use that dried meat on him like a healing item. Unfortunately, I'm not sure if there's a way to manipulate how quickly he shows up. So, as with so many things in this game, I just keep beating my head against it until it works. Eventually, after one of our random encounters though, we will see Gao here on the Veldt. And it's pretty easy to grab him. All you need to do is not hit him after the battle ends. If you do, he'll run away and you'll have to repeat this process. That's why I bought 2 dried meats in case I accidentally hit him. Once you give the meat to him, we have to go through one of those cutscenes with lots and lots of expressive blinking, and this is not a good introduction to Gao, I feel. You get the very, Tarzan feeling from him, like a person raised separate from humanity. But I just kind of think he's annoying, you know? We really need him on this run. But he just really makes no sense. He doesn't fit into the story very much at all. He just exists out here on the Veldt. From what I've seen, he has few reasons to follow the party around, and he only rarely interacts with other party members in their, story-specific instances. You could basically take him out of the game entirely with no real consequences. Other than that, some challenge runs would become impossible without him, but that doesn't affect the story. For whatever reason, this wild child got added into the game though, so we'll certainly make use of him. You can see even in his conversations here with Sabin and Cyan that he's hard for them to understand or to reason with, and Sabin seems to pretty frequently get frustrated with him in-game. I don't know if maybe that influenced me. Maybe without reading about their frustrations, I would just think he was quirky and fun. I don't know. But now at least we can talk a little bit about what makes Gao so useful in this game. Gao lived on the Veldt alone and had to defend himself out here, which means he had to learn about the enemies that you can run into. His special ability, depending on whether you're here or not, we have Rage and Leap. When you're on the Veldt, Leap allows you to end a combat encounter immediately. You don't get any experience. Well, you never would because we're on the Veldt. But you don't get any money or items or AP either. And then Gao leaves. He jumps off to spend time with those monsters. Eventually, you'll find him again out on the Veldt after more fighting, and he'll join you again. When he does, he will have learned the rage of those particular enemies and some of the ones that you fought in between. Often the last one that you fight, he'll also know. Rage is what we're here for, though, because Rage lets you basically turn Gao into that enemy for the duration of a fight. He will use their abilities against the enemies. If they know any magic, there's a chance that he'll use that as well. The problem with Rage and with Gao in general is that while he is raging, you can't control him. So we can kind of influence what actions he might take, but we can't force him specifically to use an ability that an enemy has. That can be kind of frustrating when we're really relying on him to use a specific skill. And that's one of the reasons I didn't end up using him, or using the rage ability at least, a whole ton in a normal game. However, in a low-level game like this, we can get some really, really powerful abilities from some of our enemies that we just really wouldn't have access to if we didn't. So what exactly are we looking for here? Well, we need some specific rages for the next section of the game. Normally, it would be quite a while before you come back to the Veldt, so you would want to be extra greedy. We'll actually be making a trip back here in the not-so-distant future, so that means we don't need to worry about learning every single rage available. We do, however, have a few that I really want to grab before we leave here. We want to find a Templar for Fire 2, a Hazer for Bolt 2, Pterodon for Fireball, a Vaporite or a Bomb for Blaze, and very importantly, we need to find a Primordite for Numbblade, which inflicts Stop, and we need to find a Stray Cat for Cat Scratch. I also end up getting Marshall here with Wind Slash. That's a nice bonus, but not a requirement. On top of that, we need to raise a little bit of money to purchase another White Cape, and I also want to fight at least 2 Telstars so that we can get more of the green berets they drop. That'll help us increase party members' HP. After accomplishing those things, we'll be ready to head to the next part of the game. I didn't need to do this, but I also completed a short side quest to get a relic that recovers HP as we walk. Honestly, we'll almost certainly never use it, so I'm not even going to bother talking about that quest because it's just a pain. But if you're curious, feel free to shoot me a message. So now we get to the cave on the Veldt. This is apparently where Gao has his shiny treasure. So we need to kind of stumble around and figure out where that is, because I guess he doesn't know. Our first stop in one of the corners here is a tonic. Cyan and Sabin are disappointed, but don't worry. That's not what we're here for. Next up is another one of the places in the game where we see that Gao is just oh so silly. He scares Sabin at the edge of a cliff and laughs while we lose 500 gold from our inventory. Great. Thanks, bud. After Cyan takes the lead here and calms everybody down, we move on. Turns out that Gao's shiny treasure is a diving helm. How convenient, since we have to literally jump into a raging current to get home. I hope there's enough room for 3 heads in this helmet. We're going to need to get real cozy. After all that, we're finally ready to leave this continent and head back to Narsh. I want to take a second to emphasize again that Cyan and Shadow have both told Sabin that this is the way to go back home. We went through a haunted forest, rode a ghost train that shouldn't exist, jumped off a waterfall, and now we're about to jump into a current called the Serpent Trench. And even after all that, we're going to have to take a ferry back to South Figaro. So my real question is, how often do people take this path? Some random ninja guy and a king's bodyguard both knew about it. Is this like hopping on the interstate or the Autobahn? I don't get it, man. There are a couple of options to decide between in the Serpent Trench, though we'll go with the default both times. We will encounter some enemies down here, but we'll just run from them like everywhere else. It's important that we encounter an aspic down here, and we do. I don't think I've ever not seen one during a trip through the Serpent Trench, but I did save just before entering the cave on the Veldt, so we could have gone back if necessary. I also like how this Serpent Trench, this current that travels underwater across the planet, has doors and little puzzles. I guess people must really be using this. How kind of them not to open any of the chests down here so that we could have them. The other important thing that we need to do down here is pick up our 4th green beret. That gives us enough to kit out a whole team with those, so now everybody will have just a tiny bit more HP, and sometimes that's all that matters. As we wrap things up in the Serpent Trench, we'll find ourselves flushed out of the water onto the docks of a new city called Nicaea, a small independent port town. There's nothing important to do here, but there is a little scene I skipped that you can trigger if you talk to one of the dancers in a pub. A dancer kind of eyes up Cyan and flirts with him, making him pretty uncomfortable. Remember, Cyan's wife died 2 hours ago, so yikes. Nicaea is just a stopping point for us. There's a ferry that'll take us to South Figaro, which ends this scenario and reunites everybody. We'll drop a quick save outside of town, if only to avoid having to get through the trench again. Though now that I think back on it, there aren't actually any encounters between now and our next save point, so kind of a waste. I actually think this place is kind of cool, but we won't spend much time in the town until we eventually visit it in the second half of the game. For us, the important part is getting onto the ferry. I checked all the shops in town, but there's nothing we need that we don't already have, so off we go. Here we see, before we end, just kind of a weird part where Cyan and Gao haven't met any of the other returners, and yet they seem really involved in this. We'll actually have a little bit of drama in the next video with some of those characters meeting for the first time. But this is where we'll call this one, because that is the end of Sabin's scenario. In the next one, we'll get all of the characters from all 3 scenarios back in one place, and we'll have another one of those cool kind of split the party tower defense style fights. If you made it this far, I'd like to say thanks for tuning in. Feel free to like or subscribe if you wish. I appreciate it. If you have any comments, feel free to leave them below. Otherwise, I will catch you next time.